Happy New Year, and welcome to the January 3rd meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Exeter Township School District Committee of the Whole meeting. Just a reminder that our meetings for the year will be back to the first and third Tuesdays of the month, with only a very few necessary exceptions. I think Election Day is one of them. Will you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. Fike, would you please take roll?
Dr. Ann Herring, John Fiddler,
Here.
Dr. Andrea Battler,
Here.
Dr. David Hemberger,
Here.
Jason Mell,
Here.
Timothy Morgan,
Here.
Robert Quinter, Julia Schaefer,
Here.
Allison Wilson,
Here.
8 present, 1 absent.
Thank you, Mr. Fike. In addition to the school board members in attendance, we're joined at the board table by our solicitor, Sharon Montaigne, and members of the school district administration, including Dr. Christy Howler, superintendent, and Mrs. Dawn Harris, assistant superintendent, and Mr. Brian Fike, who serves as our business administrator as well as our board secretary. The meeting minutes are attached. Does anybody have any changes or discussions they would like to make regarding the meeting minutes for the December 7th board reorganization, special voting, and committee of the whole meetings, as well as the December 19th board voting meeting? We'll be voting on these in 2 weeks. We will not be amending the agenda tonight, so we'll move right to the Education Committee. Dr. Battler, please.
Thank you, Mr. Fiddler. It is recommended that the Board of School Directors approve the 2023-24 district calendar as attached. You can find it here. Would you like to speak to this, Dr. Howler?
Sure, and if I could ask, I believe Joe Way is in the closet tonight, if he could put the calendar up on the screen. Thank you, Joe. So crafting a school district calendar is never easy, and I learned that firsthand this year when I was initially very excited to do it, and then it became this puzzle piece where then there was puzzle pieces that seemed like they didn't fit or that they were missing because we were trying to figure out how to comply with the law of having 180 student days and also abide by our teacher contract of 189 work days, knowing that we have a substantial amount of work to do in the school district. Several weeks ago, right before the holiday, Dr. Josh Hoyt came to the school board and spoke about a math needs assessment that he completed K through 6, but really focusing on K through 4. And from that math assessment, we learned that we do have a great deal of work to do in the area of math. In addition to math, we also have work to do in science because the next generation science standards will be going into effect in Pennsylvania, I believe, by 2026. And that will entail our teachers K through 12 looking at our science curriculum, ensuring that those standards are incorporated, and then also making sure that we have the right materials to teach the students in those areas and those standards that are coming out. Recently, just back in December, there was a conference held for educators across the state of Pennsylvania. And at that conference, one of the things that was unveiled was that there's also going to be new information or new requirements as far as the responsibility of teachers to teach pieces of ELA, especially for our primary students. And again, in order for our teachers to be able to do that and change the curriculum, they're going to need time. So thinking about all of these things that we're required to do in addition to safety and mental health, and then all these changes and just the general things day to day that we need to do, we desperately needed more professional development time. Our teachers needed that. as of now, this year, we really only had 3 days. We had a full day in October, we had a full day in November, and we had a full day in March. Previous to that, a number of years ago, we did have half days that were built in, and we had other days that were incorporated throughout the year. And we did move away from that. And I believe that as a result of that, it really took away that much needed time that our teachers require in order to look at student data and make the instructional changes that are beneficial to what their students needs. So we talked about it as a team, and we looked at a number of different school district calendars, and we felt that we took the best of those pieces and put them into our district calendar. And then we were thoughtful to align it to when we saw our benchmarking time for assessment. So we do use SAS, and we use STAR assessment, and we're looking to incorporate the CDTs, which are the classroom diagnostic tool, which is something that we've looked at in the past. And we believe that moving towards looking at data and then just the required professional development that we need to do, that this calendar certainly will start to help us meet the needs of our staff and the requirements that we have for PDE. So what we've done is we've added in half days throughout the school year. Those days are specifically for teachers to be talking and collaborating, looking at student data, and making changes. The full days, which are Act 80 days, those days will be geared more towards a professional development plan of meeting the needs that we have as far as next generation science standards, if we need to rewrite curriculum, looking at the math needs, looking at the broadness of our ELA needs. I'm sure that there's people out there that are asking, Christy, well, why can't people do this during the summer? Why can't the teachers get together during the summer? And that's an excellent question, and I think it's fair. Our teachers do have 2 flex days during the summer, but again, those are typically tailored to what needs to get done day to day. It's not meant to be that time for people to collaborate, because it is very difficult to get people in during the summer. If we were getting large groups of people in during the summer, especially to do some of the curriculum work and looking at the curriculum that needs to be done, that would become a financial burden on the school district, because we would need to pay large groups of people to come in and do that. And that's not saying that we never do that, but to do that on a regular basis would also not be responsible for us fiscally, as the business manager is kind of giving me a look over there. But, we have to use the time that we have. And again, looking at other school districts and looking at the way that they've crafted their calendar, this aligns more to what some of the other districts have done in order to give their teachers time. So we are very excited to bring this calendar forward. Our admin team has already looked at it. We did share it with the leadership of the union to get their input, again, to make sure that we're working collectively to move the district forward, and that is specific to support our teachers so they can help our students. And we did very closely we thought about parents in this way too, as far as trying to make the half days when it would be logical, when it would be a Friday or it would be a long weekend. So if families wanted to get away and do something, so it wouldn't be as big of a burden. As a working parent myself, I know that can oftentimes be a struggle, which leads me to the spring break. So when we looked at school districts across the county and what they were doing, the majority of school districts that we were looking at have a very short spring break. They might have off Thursday, Friday, and then Monday. Some of the school districts that have that, they also have Thursday as a snow makeup day. Other districts that they did have a full week, they used a majority of those days as snow makeup days. Pretty much all the districts in Berks County do have snow makeup days, and that's in addition to the fact that we now have FID days, which makes calling off school a little bit more complicated. Some districts have decided that they're going to use FID days first. Other districts have decided, like Exeter, that they're going to be using snow days first. And I suspect that some districts, their superintendent may have the authority to make a call based on what the weather brings that particular day. At this time for this calendar, we've made the decision to do snow days first, and then, if needed, do the FID days. The way that this particular calendar is built is we have 5 snow days in place, and they are all during that spring break period. There's 5 built-in snow days. If we would use all those days, we would then move to the FID days, which would give us, I believe, another 5 days. So that would give us a total of 10 days that we could use. Because on the other hand, we have people that book vacations very early, and to extend it beyond June, it does cut into camps that people have prepaid for and vacations that they've prepaid for. Plus, we also have to be thoughtful about graduation and making sure that we have the 180 days in place. So we took that into consideration as well. The other thought that we had about backing up to the beginning of the calendar is why the 2 days in the beginning of the year, the 2 half days in the beginning of the year, because that is a big departure from what we've done in the past. Anybody who has had a little one go through school, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, you are a complete nervous wreck the first 2 days of school when they're trying to get on that school bus and trying to make their way home. It's very nervous. It's very nerve-wracking for a principal and for the teachers. And oftentimes, our elementary kids aren't getting home till 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon because the buses are going slow. They're trying to learn kids. It takes a long time. They want to make sure that kids are getting off at the right stops. We felt that by backing it up, by having an early dismissal those 2 days, it gives our bus drivers more time. It's not late in the evening, and then kids have some time to cool down in the afternoon before they start again that second day, and it gives them 2 days to get in school and learn the routine before we jump into that first full week of school starting that following week. So those were all the things that we looked at and we thought about. And again, it's certainly up to the board if you would move forward with our recommendation of this calendar. And it's certainly up to the board if you would like me to continue to move forward with the snow days as they are in place, with using traditional snow days first and then moving towards the FID days, or if we want to look at a different model, which is certainly why we're having this discussion this evening. So hopefully that answered a number of your questions that you may have had about the calendar, but I'm happy to answer any more that you may have.
I have a couple questions. First of all, I want to remind everyone that's here and that's listening that we are not voting on this today, that we have another 2 weeks to consider this, that we welcome your feedback. This is an important decision every year, I think, for families. There's a lot of information that can be found on social media about how people feel about this. However, it's just important that everyone recognizes that if you want to have your voice heard, that it's important that you email a board member or an administrator or come to a meeting and speak during the comment section, because we do take those things seriously and take it all into consideration. Dr. Heller, one of the questions that I have is really around spring break, and that is, what's option 2? So if we did not want to have our snow days there, and we wanted to give our parents the opportunity, because I do respect the fact that adults have to take off from their jobs too, and when they see this, they may plan a vacation and they put their own time in. And so what is option 2 if the board was to decide that?
So if you wanted to preserve spring break completely, we would add them on to the end of the school year.
And what would be the disadvantage of adding them on to the school year?
The same disadvantage to having it during spring break where parents who planned vacation or prepaid for camps, because camps typically start probably that next week, they would have to pull their child out and not be able to go, or they might choose not to send their child to that camp, or not be able to make good plans for daycare. That's very difficult as a parent.
And is there anything data-wise that suggests the fact that the kids really do not have a break from January 2nd until the end of the year, if those snow days are made up, that that the kids really need to have those couple days to kind of recharge their batteries. Because I mean, I think that's another thing that's on my mind is that do we need that time to kind of just step away for a little bit and get back into it? Just curious your thoughts on that.
So I've been in the district, I guess, about 16 years now, and I can't really recall previous to the last year that we didn't use days throughout the school year for snow makeup days. And some of them, I believe, were done during spring break. Oftentimes that Monday after that holiday, after that Sunday, was often used as a snow makeup day. As a parent with 3 kids, 2 already through the district, I don't know that it really was detrimental to my children. I think by the end of the year, personally, from my perspective, by the end of the year, they're kind of done. And from what I gather from parents who I know, it always seemed like they'd rather be done sooner in June to be able to make plans than have that time off in March or April, whenever it would fall. But again, that's, another person's perspective. But we would then wind up having to add them on to the end of the year, and that could potentially impact the number of days that we get in, because we are required to get in 180 days, and it does wind up sometimes becoming challenging with our seniors.
Last question. You had mentioned as far as FID days versus snow days, the way the district does it this calendar year. And you had said that you had mentioned another district that the superintendent may have the authority to make that choice. Just because I'm having a hard time recalling, was that a board decision that was made last year, that the board made the decision that you don't have the authority as a superintendent to make that choice?
I don't remember exactly, but I believe it was a joint decision under Dr. Marzewski.
And would it be your opinion that, should we had that discussion today, that you think it would be a good idea for you to have the authority to make that decision of whether to have a FID day or a snow day moving forward for this year?
Well, I think everybody here knows how I feel about snow. And so it just adds another layer of pressure calling a snow day versus a FID day. But I do think it might be helpful. This last day that we had to call off was very challenging. And I appreciate, again, from a parent perspective, that we didn't make the call till the next morning, that it was a 3-hour delay, and then they had to make plans for a 3-hour delay, and then we wound up calling off as soon as we did, because ice is so unpredictable, and we don't want to bring kids in. Had we had a different calendar that permitted me to use the FID day, I would have, like other districts, called that for a FID day. So that way parents would have had an earlier heads up. But it could have gone either way that day, but at least we would have gotten the day in.
So I'd certainly open discussion to the fellow board members, but if this is currently a board mandate, I certainly would be in favor of looking at adding to the voting agenda next week to give the authority to the superintendent to make that decision. But I'd certainly like to hear from everybody else, and thank you for your explanations.
I agree with using FID days prior to snow makeup days. I think that does appease, not using our snow makeup days in March. How hard is it to plan for FID days? I know we haven't received any information this year as parents for our students during a FID day. So, what all does that entail as far as getting things ready, sending it home? Is it in process now for FID, or is it not?
So it is in process now. I do think we're in a better position in the next coming years to manage FID days opposed to last year. Last year we didn't have as many devices in the hands of students to be able to use, but this year all of our 3rd grade students so 3rd through 12th grade have devices, so they will all have access to Schoology, and that substantially changes the way that we can approach instruction during a FID day. I will tell you that a FID day is not going to be like a student instruction day in the classroom. You just can't replicate a teacher. But I do think there is a way for us to approach FID day instruction differently than what was done in the past. So I'm glad that we don't necessarily have the FID days in place this year for us to be using right away, because I don't think that we're there yet. I think that if that's something that we want to do, it is going to take time, and we are going to have to pull our teachers together to develop things that are aligned to what we're doing and are worthwhile instructional activities. But that's what they will essentially be. It's not going to be teaching, it's going to be more review. Now, having said that, is review important? Absolutely. And teachers often don't have time to do that during the course of the day, but I do think that we can do things that are relevant and impactful. We just need the time to do it. And I think, did you want to say something? Because you were creeping close.
Was it my creeping up
It
slowly
was.
to the mic? That
It was.
gave
I didn't
a
know if
hint
you wanted
that
a cough drop or what was happening.
I just wanted to add, when you were indicating some of the things that would make a FID day successful, that consistency across grade levels is something that Dr. Haller and I both had a concern about. So if we were to approach using those flexible instruction days, making sure that, you know, what's being offered for one classroom in one building at a grade level is the same sort of content and material that's being offered across all grade levels. So Jackson Wald, Lorraine, and Owatan Creek, third grade, all having similar and consistent content.
But just to be clear, that gives you if we give you the authority, you're not saying you're going to use it first. You're just saying you're going to make that decision as time goes. It doesn't mean that kids don't get a snow day if we get 3 feet of snow instead of a FID day. And it doesn't mean if we're not ready for a FID day that you still make it a snow day. It means that you have the decision to make that if you feel as we're ready and it's the right circumstance.
Yeah, just a little bit more pressure. So I will tell you, though, when we were researching different calendars, there was one district that we came across that very clearly on their calendar said that they will exhaust all their FID days before they move to their snow days. And they did, in addition to having that on their calendar, they also had, I believe, 4 snow days built into their calendar. And I believe one of them was during their spring break, and they did not have a week off for spring break. So the majority of the calendars that we examined, they don't have a full week off for spring break. They have off Thursday, Friday, Monday. Districts that do have a full week, the majority are using them for snow makeup days. We only came across, and we didn't look at every single one. We did a sampling. One district that we looked at, which is in 2 counties, that particular school district did have a full spring break, and that might align more with the other county that they're in.
I would support the suggestion of throwing the pressure back on you. You made up the darn calendar, you might as well execute. But I think what we need, or what comes to my mind, is I read that we're behind. I see an article here that math and their, the standardized tests are still bad. We paid the guy money to come in and tell us that our math program needs a lot of work. We know English is also a problem. So in my time here, from 1952 to 1964, as a student, we never had a spring break. And it was used as instruction days. We started school shortly after the beginning of September, ended up around mid-June. Although I wholly endorse family days, family vacations, and being with your kids, we're in a hole right now that we have to dig out of. And I would probably not be very sympathetic to complaints about, oh, my kids, I'm not going to have this week off in March, to take my kid to Disneyland. Well, claim it to be an educational trip like they've done for 20 years. So, and submit it for an excused absence. But we've got to face the fact that we've got to make up for what occurred over the pandemic period when the politicians decided what we were going to do with our kids in education. So I just a comment, and people can throw rocks at me if they'd like, but the fact is, we are here to give the kids an education.
And keeping that in mind, if there's, because kids do need a break. I mean, honestly, my own daughter, she very nicely slept in every single day over the last couple of days. She really needed it. She was exhausted. And so having thought about that, we did think it was important to build in a couple long weekends, the one in January, again in February. And if you notice, we also did that in March. In May. In May, over Memorial Day, we have a lot of families that do go away. They take an educational trip that day. So we try to be thoughtful and save that day. So families, if they wanted to bank that day and use it at another time during the school year, that they certainly could do that. And that gives them a long weekend there before the end of the school year. So we did try and split it up to give kids breaks throughout the year.
I'm not objecting to the 3-day weekends or even 4-day weekends, but I'm saying when we have to dig ourselves out of a hole so far as the child's education, then I'm not going to be too sympathetic about they missed a day out of spring break, which M. Luther never thought we needed. So
I'd like to take this rare opportunity to say I tend to agree with Mr. Quinter. I don't always have that opportunity. This doesn't happen that often. So,
okay?
but
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Darn, I'm getting old, David. Don't
Okay,
do
hold
that.
on.
Is there a doctor in the house?
I've reached a certain point, but I think there are some things that really we should think about with FID days, and I would welcome a maybe on another day, maybe a more in-depth discussion about FID days, some of the benefits and some of the things that what I view are detrimental. I mean, I think there are also some things that go beyond just the fact that it's really inferior instruction. And I think to your point, Mr. Quinter, is that we should be valuing every minute the kids are in school, and we know that we have a long way to go, and that's never not been the case, I would have to say. And I think there are several board members, here I think tonight who would agree that we need to make some real gains academically. So FID days are not moving us in that direction. I'll say it's not going to help us acquire that goal. I think the other thing too is sort of the wasted resources on that particular day when teachers are not. We give that day away essentially. Teachers are still paid for a FID day, but they're not really serving and working that day as a teacher, and that includes not just teachers but also other support staff and maybe related services staff, and the list probably goes on. So I think it's not necessarily the best use of the funds that we how we spend, especially if we like put one FID day after another. I kind of see this as being a problem. I can understand it's got a place, and I think it does have a place for emergency purposes, and that's how we should be looking at it. But I think when we know we are likely to have snow days, I think we should make it up in some manner and make it a regular instructional day, so we walk away with as much as possible with 180 days of actual school instruction for our students. That's the way I see it. But I'm open to that conversation, and if we're looking at a maybe a unique opportunity where we can improve the value of that day in some manner and make it more genuinely an educational benefit for students, I'd be receptive, but I just don't see how it would work.
My concern with this calendar, just two things, but the one thing is conferences in April. When we look at when conferences are, that leaves us with 33 school days remaining. And I think when you think of what the purposes of conferences are, to have conversations, to, make a plan, you have students that are struggling, 33 days left in the school year does not, that's not a good use of our conferences. I mean, really, I think they should probably be more at the end of February so that you have time to make a change. So that is really my concern with the conferences being in April.
And we can certainly change that. That would be a very easy fix.
And my one other thing was, I was wondering about that flex day, May 28th, just because it's an odd time with school being done the next week. Like, couldn't it just be the last day of school would be the teacher's flex day or something so that, you know, they could be done? But I just feel that for a lot of families, that isn't a vacation day, a Tuesday. You know, and maybe a lot do choose it, but I kind of feel like that's, for a lot of families, that's a Tuesday and they have to be at work.
So from my end, I'm not kind of going back to the conversation of flexible instruction days. I'm not opposed to giving that authority to Dr. Haller. I think that does make sense. You know, I think there's still a debate whether or not how useful those are, or if that's something we want to do. But if we did venture down that and decided to offer more fit days, you had mentioned the turnaround time needed to get the teachers and everyone prepped in order to get the materials ready. Do you know how long that would typically be? Would that be even something that could be done by this year to handle fit days?
We actually have a meeting scheduled. I want to say it's next week. We were just talking about it today, and we're going to be working with Dan Wilczak from our tech department to start pulling some things together and create an outline so we can start to build a framework from within, and then pull people together to work within that framework. But we want to make sure that we feel comfortable with the framework first before we start to share it out. So myself and Dan and the administrative team are going to start working on that. And it's really more so for our elementary students because our secondary students, they've been using Schoology. And so I do think we need to beef that up. But they already have that product. They've already been using it. It was really lacking, particularly with our K-3 students. So that is our main area of focus.
So it does kind of lead to my other question. What do we do for the grades that aren't one-to-one with the device? Is that just offline instruction? Is it typically what
right now it is offline instruction, and that's why, you know, I'm not terribly sad that we're not using Fid days this year first, because I don't think that we are prepared to use them as effectively as perhaps other districts. But I do think this is an opportunity to explore sending home devices with our K-2 students. We do have them. As a result of the pandemic, all of our students did have a device, and they're not being used, and the district did spend money to do that. But it would require the administrators and the teachers working together to come up with what does that look like for a K-2 student. Again, not overly concerned about our third grade students because they did go one-to-one this year. But the reality is, Dr. Hemberger said, is that, you know, ultimately it's not a teacher. And anyone who's tried during the pandemic, I don't want to have anybody break out in a cold sweat, but if you had a K-2 student, I had a kindergartner, you know how challenging that was, even with the devices. And so I do think, you know, we have to be thoughtful and realistic about that, because parents might be working, students might be at daycare, they might be at a grandparent's house, they might not have access to Wi-Fi. So we have to be thoughtful about that, particularly for our little ones.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't think this is an easy job. Every year when we look at this, there's always a myriad of different opinions, social media, emails, and I think those again are welcome. We like to hear everybody's opinion that comes in. You know, at the end of the day, we're not going to make everyone happy. There's going to be somebody that's unhappy with the decision that was made, and we're just going to have to live with it. The one thing I would kind of say, maybe in terms of Mr. Quinter and Dr. Hemberger, and I respect what you both are saying, just in terms of having, you know, to catch up, obviously from from some of the pandemic loss. The other consideration I think we need to make, though, is burnout, which is, I think, a real factor. And And that's kind of why, again, I'm looking at that spring break. And if for whatever reason, those days do get eliminated, that is a concern from my end.
And we can certainly scale back the number of days if we decide to utilize fit days, intermingle. If we choose to do some fit days and some, snow makeup days, we could certainly have it be Thursday, a guaranteed Thursday, Friday, Monday, and only use, Monday, Tuesday, knowing that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, knowing that we have, the fit days as well. It still gives us, 8 days to kind of play with. Pennsylvania weather, I think any weather right now is like just really unpredictable. And it was like 9 years ago when we just had one blizzard after another, and we were like, adding days. We used up all our snow days, and then we had to adjust the calendar, and then we had to add days to the end of the year, and it was kind of a nightmare. I don't think anybody really wants to get into that again, because it does really impact also really the seniors. So that is something that we do need to think about.
I agree with first of all, I want to say that with Mr. Quinter and Dr. Hamburger said, while I agree 100%, 180 days is 180 days. So we could take spring break out completely. We would just get out 5 days earlier. I mean, we're still getting 180 instructional days. I do agree with Dr. Hamburger about fit days. However, I certainly stand by the fact that superintendent job is a lot more important than mine, and I don't understand enough about it that she should have the authority to do that if she feels as though the program is where it needs to be. I do appreciate Mrs. Wilson bringing up about the conferences as well as Tuesday the 28th. I do agree with that. And my only other concern is we have these snow makeup days for the spring break week. However, we end Q3 that Tuesday. So my concern is if you have a family that goes on vacation that's pre-planned and prepaid, and so they pull that child out of school, and we all know, especially when you get to the secondary level, if you miss 2 or 3 days of school, you have missing assignments, you get zeros for the assignments, and then you go out of Q3 on Tuesday, and they don't have the opportunity to make those days up. Is that going to affect their quarter grades as a result of that? And if that's so, are we able to move Q3, or is that something we need to reconsider?
Well, typically we would know ahead of time if a student has an educational trip planned, and then that would be worked out with the teacher about where they are as far as their assignments and what assignments are needed. And I think our teachers are very sensitive and reasonable to that. We might not be able to give the child a grade, and that has happened when kids have gotten sick. We've had to, give them an incomplete or hold their report card. There's things that we need to do. We just need parents to communicate with us so that way we can work with them to make sure that we're doing the right thing and that we're on the same page.
I also support Mrs. Wilson's suggestion, both of them.
Thanks. Does anybody remember the days where we used to have 183 days built into our calendar, and then like the first 3 snow days were like you just didn't make them up? Like, why did we stop doing that?
Well, I don't know why exactly we stopped doing it. I suspect some of it might have to do with the Act 80 days, because Act 80 days can count towards instructional days. But it's always wise and best to make sure that you have 180 student days and not necessarily bank on those Act 80 days. Joe Way, who's in the closet, gave me a whole tutorial on that because for years he was involved with the calendar. And, school districts do get funding for the number of days that we have. And if we don't meet them, we don't get the full amount of funding. So you kind of sometimes also don't want to leave money on the table. I'm not sure that's the best way to put it, but it's, right, Brian? He's looking at me.
I would put it that way.
Yeah. So he's my teacher. And so when we crafted the calendar, we were thoughtful about making sure that we had 180 guaranteed student days, knowing that we had 3 Act 80 days built in there in case like things like went really crazy with the weather, that we had those days like that we could kind of bank on.
What if we made snow makeup day number 4 the 28th of May? This way we would guarantee families a 5-day break over March.
But it's a teacher flex day, so that means a lot of teachers wouldn't be there that day.
So in our teacher's contract, we do have 2 flex days that we need to honor. Traditionally, the one has always been after Thanksgiving, that Monday after Thanksgiving. And the second one, excuse me, has kind of moved around quite a bit. As we get later into the school year, we had difficulty with subs. So it's helpful, in May, we also oftentimes are short on subs. But again, we could certainly not have the half day on that Friday before Memorial Day and then make that the teacher flex day. And then it just gives everyone a standard 4-day weekend, which I think that families would greatly appreciate. So we could just take away that half day, and that's why we wanted to put this on the agenda now, so there could be an open discussion and hear everyone's thoughts.
So I actually didn't see that. I apologize. So the 24th is a half day, but it would seem to me if you were going to plan a vacation, you would do a Friday to Monday as opposed to Saturday to Tuesday. Why wouldn't we make the 24th a teacher flex day?
We could certainly do that.
I mean, I think if we're going to do a teacher flex day, I'd rather see the kids be guaranteed off a true 4-day weekend than I think Mrs. Wilson makes a good point. Most people don't plan long weekends Saturday to Tuesday. They would be, Friday to Monday. Just a thought.
And then as far as the conferences are concerned, because I do agree with you, Allison, about that, in October, quarter 1 ends, and then we have conferences in November. Can we do conferences like February before President's Day? Like do 2 half days that Thursday, Friday?
Yeah,
or Thursday, Friday instead of the 1 half day?
Sure, we can. I mean, we can certainly adjust the calendar. That wouldn't be a problem.
Dr. Hale, I just had a question about BCTC. Is this schedule compatible with their schedule? Did you have a chance to look at their schedule to see if it matched up in any way?
I haven't had a chance to look at their schedule. This calendar, if several other districts kind of go with what they've had in the past, it does align with their calendars more so than what our calendar did in the past. Based on what I've heard informally, the districts are kind of still all over the place as far as when they're starting school. There's some districts that are starting the week before we are. We made the conscious decision not to do that because of hiring. We might not have all of our teachers in place. That's why we decided to keep it where it is at. But I think this aligns us more to other districts, not necessarily the VOTAC schools.
Yeah, I just know that when we're not aligned and we start at different times, it creates a bit of an issue with the full instructional opportunity for the kids to go to the tech programs. Something that I think is valuable to look at. And I've always kind of advocated, I know it's probably very remote that anybody would ever consider it, but a countywide calendar would really be a nice way to kind of go. It would relieve the BCTC students and maybe other programs as well of some of the difficulties and hardships. But yeah, it's very, local boards like to have their own calendars.
While we're at it, Dr. Hemberger, let's go with countywide school districts. Like Virginia.
Is that a motion, Mr.?
No. Just something I've been very interested in, following Virginia, Maryland, and there are probably other states that do it too. I'm also interested in Mrs. Wilson and what about this 183 business? Do we have an archivist?
That's what we used to do. 183 days, and then if you didn't use the snow days, you got them back. So like usually it was that Friday, but Memorial Day was always one that you would get back first, and then they would take days off the end of the school year. I guess it's just harder to probably put it together with
calendar lottery.
I feel like they did that when I was in school, but that was a long time ago.
I remember that. but there's probably something in the teacher's contract now that precludes us from doing that. So I don't know. I haven't seen the contract recently
Any
I
other
think we should
comments?
put Bob in charge of the calendar. That's what, we can put that on the agenda.
Mr. Pidler, I would be in support of. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that was thrown around today. If Dr. Heller felt as though there were a couple options that she liked, that maybe we could have her bring a couple options to the voting meeting. This way we can see what several of them look like, and if one of them fits what everybody's agreeable to, then we could move forward with it.
I like that idea. Yeah. If that's all right with you, Kristen.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, there's only so many things that you can really do with the calendar, but you know, we can certainly play around with it. Jen Breen made me this lovely spreadsheet where we're plugging in numbers to make sure that we have teacher days right and student days right. There was a couple times that I had to walk away and then come back to it, but we have a couple different versions already, so that's not a problem.
Okay, and when you, sorry, I just got to jump in because I keep trying to jump in and it's not working. So quick question. When you were talking before about the teachers and them needing, instruction or, working on things, I do see in here where you have that in October and November still, correct? And then you had talked about the half days. Those are the early dismissals in February, March, and May. Are those the ones that you're specifically talking about where they can get together and...
Yeah, we added a number of days. We added a day in December. We added a day in we added a day in September. We added a day in December. The 2 days in November, they're for conferences. They're not for professional development. We added a day in February. We added a day in March. The 2 days in April would have been for conferences. And then, of course, we had the day in May and, the days in June. The days that are throughout the calendar specifically, we are aligning to when we would give student benchmarking assessments. In the past, what we would do is we would be able, to pull teams of teachers during the school day to discuss the data. So we would do data teams, and the teachers would meet. They would look at the data. We would make instructional decisions. They would have time to plan, and we would be able to move forward. We can't do that anymore because we don't have the substitutes to be able to do that. So if we want teachers to have time to look at the data and collaborate, then we need to give them the time during the school year to do that, which is why we added in those half days to align with the benchmarking assessments so they could do the assessment, pull their data, look at it, work through it as a team, plan, and then get going with it the next day, and then know that they have the next meeting time set up.
So those will be specifically for...
Yes.
Okay.
That was very intentional.
Okay, perfect. And and you still have the October and November were the full days.
So the October day is a countywide day. So across Berks County, that is a day where all school districts participate in professional development. That's very beneficial specifically for our music teachers, our art teacher, our PE teachers, because they go out, work collaboratively. And it's also been a great day for us within the district to do some very specific training. That's why we've done some of our mental health training. We have safety training that needs to get done, and that's days that we can work on. This year for our secondary teachers, we had some next generation science information coming in for October, November. So we've been very specific about that time. And then in November, the reason why that came about was because many of you may recall that for years Lorraine was a polling place, and it got to the point where we just believed that they were talking about possibly making a Watton Creek also a polling place, and that would be just very challenging with having students in the building. There's a number of districts who their school districts or their buildings are also polling places, and they use that day as a professional development day, and they shut down the building so that way it can be used. May is often a late voting day, so that's why we didn't move to have the May election be a professional development day. But that was certainly a consideration that we had, but we felt that the other days were fit better into the calendar at this time.
And I do agree with Ms. Wilson about the second conferences being too late. I definitely agree with that. Otherwise, I just wanted to make sure that our teachers, want to make sure our teachers had enough time to actually discuss all of this data as well.
Any other questions or comments? I also support the idea of giving the decision on that to you. I think that's why you're here. We don't want to add more people to the mix. Okay. All right, Dr. Haller.
I'm Dr. Battler, but that's okay. It's okay, Mr. Fiddler, no worries. Okay, so we'll be moving that on. So second on the agenda is recommended that the Board of School Directors approve the following list of staff conferences. There is one listed. Is there any discussion about that?
I just have a question. I noticed on a lot of these conference requests, we're not reimbursing for transportation. I'm just wondering why, because it's something that districts often would do, and I noticed a lot of times we're not doing that. Mr. Fike, yeah. But I mean, we actually have policy that says that you're entitled to it. I mean, you're entitled to transportation reimbursement. Do you apply for it and get compensation for it, or is it just not listed here? Okay. But I don't see it, I rarely see it listed here, unless it's something extraordinary like a airplane flight or something like that, and there are costs associated with travel in a car. So I'm just asking the question. I'm not necessarily making any recommendations, just wondering why we don't include transportation when we're going to out of the area.
Yeah, it's something that teachers and administrators can, and some do and some don't. We even have a spreadsheet that calculates it for people. They just have to put it in, but oftentimes people don't want to seek that reimbursement for whatever reason.
So it's not our practice to deny it. It's just
No,
simply that
people
it's
just
up to
don't
that.
put it in.
It's up to that professional to decide
Yeah.
whether or not they want to submit. Okay.
Okay, is there anything else with this one? No? Alright, moving on to item C. It is reported that the following field trips within the 60-mile radius have been approved. We have 7. The first 4 for the high school chess team, traveling to Fleetwood, Daniel Boone, Ole, and Wyomissing. Number 5, students from grade 8 to 12, grade band, senior and junior high schools will be traveling to Temple University. And then 6 and 7, the high school jazz band will be traveling to Kutztown and Twin Valley High School for jazz performances. Any discussion? Nope. Moving on to item D. It is recommended that the Board of School Directors approve the following field trips beyond the 60-mile radius. We have the male and female athletes of the senior high school indoor field and track team traveling to Staten Island, New York to compete. The junior high grade social studies classes traveling to historical Philadelphia. The senior high school military history class traveling to Washington, D.C. and select students from the senior high grades 10 to 12 chorus going to Bangor High School for districts. Any discussion about that? And moving on, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors approve a contract between Exeter Township School District and Power School Group LLC to add K-12 assessment and advanced reporting using the Performance Matters platform. Costs are listed below. Payment would be deferred until 7/1. The district currently utilizes the On-Hand Schools Ed Insight platform and would end our current year-to-year agreement at that time. Ed Insight has an annual fee of $20,000, $20,304. Adding a similar assessment tool to Ed Insight would add about $16,000, totaling $36,000 annually. And do you want to speak to this, Dr. Haller, first?
So Joe is actually here tonight, specifically so he can speak to it.
Well, while Joe makes it up to the podium, do we have a contract that there's something we can actually inspect?
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
That's okay. Do we actually have a contract that could be attached to the agenda? Or
Okay, so this is an
okay,
interesting-
all right, you lead
yeah,
in.
so
Okay, there we go.
it's sort of a strange scenario. So we've been pursuing an assessment module to go to be a part of our district grading, so that we have more insight sort of into the classroom. So we would have formative and summative assessments, unit assessments that were common and stored in a central repository, so that when we're doing data analysis, we have sort of a very micro level of digging in to see at the curricular level, where things are, not successful, where we are successful, and get more of a district perspective on the data, instead of just relying on state performance data via PSSA or Keystone or CDT, which is another assessment we'll be starting to use. Those are assessments that are tied to the state standards. What we need to do is have a tool that allows us to sort of get a little bit more, in deep with our data. So we've been, this is more of a teaching and learning department, so I work with Eric Flam and Maggie Wright, and we spend a lot of time talking about these types of things. And so since we brought On-Hand Schools in place, we've been very, very happy with the data we're getting from it. We have a lot of folks that are using it daily for getting data, looking at performance and assessment and attendance data and discipline data and all of that stuff sort of in a way that they get a good picture of the student performance. But what we were missing was that unit kind of assessment, that district. We could build our own assessments and have them administered in an easy manner instead of having to pull kids out for PSSAs. The unit assessment could be sort of stored, compared against everyone else doing that unit. So On-Hand Schools has a product called eDoctrina, which was a very nice product. It's a new product to them, and that's what costs the $16,000 additional dollars. It is a third party. It is a third-party vendor that they brought into their product lineup. So On-Hand Schools has eSchool. On-Hand Schools is actually they have Ed Insight, and now they also have this eDoctrina. So it's sort of a expensive avenue to pursue. And one of the things we didn't like about it was it really creates another area where our teachers would have to put their assessments. So our teachers in most grades, at least 3 through 12, are using Schoology, and in other grades we're using Google Classroom, some of those other tools to do some assessments and to do some classroom level data. eDoctrina would be another totally different scenario. So if they wanted to do a unit assessment, it would have to be in eDoctrina. If they were doing a regular test, it would be in Skyward or Schoology. And so it just creates a difficulty in figuring out where all the pieces lie. eDoctrina is, like I said, it's a totally standalone, and Performance Matters, fits into Schoology. So it is actually a part of the PowerSchool suite. Schoology is part of PowerSchool. And it is a tool that's embedded in Schoology, so our teachers could go out and create a unit assessment. They could pick assessment questions from a question bank that are all mapped back to the standards, build it, administer it, and then we could look at the data as a result of it. So the real benefit, Performance Matters wasn't at the level it is now. So we've been looking at these products for a couple of years. Last June, we were going to bring a proposal forward, but we didn't feel that there was enough. We felt that with the transitions in administration last year, it was just too much to bring one more thing on board. So we've been continually looking at these products. Performance Matters came to us in December and said, hey, if you can sign on in December, we'll have you, we'll deploy, we'll defer the payments, we'll get you enrolled, get everything set up, and then you'll be able to run this system and get it all configured over the spring so that on July 1st, we would have one new product. We wouldn't have to run two products in parallel. The problem is they gave us this proposal like the week of the voting or the committee of the whole meeting. So we didn't want to bring it to you. It was like after the committee of the whole. We didn't want to throw it, on you and say, hey, there's this product. We want to have it, in place before the end of the year. We wanted to have a little bit more time to share with you a little bit about it. There is no deal on the table right now, so there is no contract per se. So the contract that we have says that we would have it signed before January 1st. So right now we have a meeting tomorrow morning with Power School to see what their next agreement might be or the next bundle that they might include for us. So it's possible that tomorrow I will have something to share with you that would say that we would start in January and be deployed by July 1st. But right now it's a lot of just want to get your input and approval for us to move forward with the product. Because again, we would be committing to a product that would be a part of the budget moving forward, and we would have to pay the 44? We'd have to pay that amount of money. I think it's $44,000 up, at that point. So it's just something I wanted to share with you. If we make a commitment now, it's an obligation that we would have to pay in July.
How do you quantify that the data you're collecting is showing results for the students?
The data that we're collecting now?
Or that we're going to collect? Who else is using it? How do we know that this $44,000 is going to give you the information that you need to make things better first?
I think that would be a teaching and learning question. I think Chrissy or Eric would be able to maybe answer that a little bit more, but I think we don't currently have the tools and the ability to dig into that. We're using this data that's available that basically is just PSSA, it's STAR data, it'll be CDT data. We're using it in separate in different pieces. We're using some of it together in on-hand schools. I can't tell you where it's successful, where it's not. That would really be a sort of a curricular instruction kind of question.
We see this as being part of a bigger comprehensive plan. We're looking at student achievement data now, but that gives you a very small snapshot of a student, particularly when you're looking at something like a PSA, PSSAs, or a Keystone. And particularly with our Keystones, we only test students in, I believe, 10th grade English. I'm looking at Tom Campbell, he's shaking his head. 9th grade algebra and then biology, whenever a child would take biology. But that's not everything that a child learns in high school. And in the junior high, it's basically math and it is ELA. We don't have anything in science in 8th grade. We don't have anything for our other subject areas or that is honed in more specifically. So it just gives you this high level view. What we really should be doing is we should be looking at that data and seeing where our strengths are and our weaknesses are and making sure that our curriculum is aligned to it. But during the course of the year, when we're teaching the curriculum, we should be giving these common formative assessments that are aligned to the curriculum that also align to what the standards are. So ideally, what would happen with a 5th grade math class is you have a number of teachers on the 5th grade team at Reichten. So you have one math teacher or two math teachers per team. They would be around the same area in the curriculum. They would give this common formative assessment on particular items that students need to know that are part of what they're eventually going to be tested on PSSEs that they're required to know. They would give that assessment. They would come back on one of those half days. This is why we also have these built in. They would look at those assessment results and they would say, okay, well, my class did really well in this area, but they didn't do really well in this area. And that would be the conversation collaboratively with the other 5th grade teachers. Now, hopefully, everybody did really well, and that's the conversation. But more than likely, what happens is people will notice that my kids didn't do well in this area, but your kids did. Why? Why did that happen? When did you teach it? How did you teach it? How much time did you spend on it? So it gives the teachers another viewpoint on how they're instructing and where the strengths are and where the weaknesses are. It might come back to that there's a deficit in the curriculum, that we're not either spending enough time on a particular concept, or we don't have the right curriculum materials in that area. Or it might just boil down to a teacher didn't spend enough time on that area because they thought maybe the kids had a better understanding on it. That happens. As a former teacher, I can tell you that does happen, where I thought the kids understood it, and then I gave them a test and they didn't understand it, and I had to go back and reteach. The power in that is in the conversation, because then that way we know that across the board in 5th grade math, that students are in fact getting the same curriculum, the same education across the board, and that it is aligned to the Pennsylvania standards, and that we can use those as checks throughout the course of the year as students build up to the PSSAs.
So I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't have a system like this.
Mm-hmm.
I understand why we need data collection to get where the administration wants to go. I fully support that. What I'm saying is, why Power School Group? Why at Insight? What research has the district done to say that this piece of software is the right software, that we have vetted this against other school districts, or whatever the case may be? I mean, we all know that you look at 10 pieces of software, they do 10 different things, and the last thing we want to do is spend $44,000 on something to say, it's good, but I wish I would have had this one. So I just want to know, why are we choosing this, and how have we vetted it?
That's a question that I can answer. So when Dr. Winters was here, Joe Calamita, Dan Wilczyk, and myself went to the IU, and there was a shootout. We were using a product called Performance Plus, which was adopted throughout the whole county, and many of us used Performance Plus long beyond its usage. It was a product that was purchased by another company, and they said they would allow the data to stay in place. We could still look at the old data, but they weren't importing new PSSAs, they weren't importing new benchmarks and data. So it really became ineffective, entirely ineffective for us, because that's the data that we were looking at. We were looking at those state assessments, those PSSAs, CDTs, all of those types of things that we could bring in that we were administering. We could then look at the data. But again, part of that is we have to wait for that data. So we wait until the summer when we get these data files, and we import the data files and we take a look at it, and it's a little too late at that point to really make granular changes in the curriculum to make sure that the students are successful. So as a result of this shootout, many of the school districts in the county went with Performance Matters. There was another product maybe a couple of them with Performance Matters. A couple others went with On-Hand Schools, like we did. 2 of the districts, after they went with the other product, converted to On-Hand Schools because they liked the flexibility of the products. At that point, On-Hand Schools was the best product in the shooting match. It did everything that we wanted it to do at that point, which was up until the point of giving those small unit assessments and having an item bank and building assessments that we could administer. So it's always been, we could have used On-Hand Schools, built common assessments, printed out Scantron sheets, and then administered the tests via Scantron, scanned them in, and did all of that sort of build up of the data. But it makes it very awkward, difficult. One more thing. Schoology now is a product, again, we've been using it very successfully for the last 8 years, and it keeps growing into the grade levels. And I asked the question about eDoctrina, is like, are we that far into Power, to Schoology that we couldn't just shift? We can't just shift. We're very embedded with what we have. Our teachers have built curriculum, they built lessons, they have a lot of stuff built in place. It's very successful. It's very heavily entrenched in our curriculum. So we don't want to leave Power School or Schoology to go to another student information system or student learning system. So that's where this product, Performance Matters, fits in so nicely because it is completely integrated into that product. So our teachers who are currently building assessments, they're putting in assessment in Schoology, they're sharing it with the kids, students are taking it, they're grading it, the grade syncs into Skyward. So that's sort of one mechanism for them doing assessments. If we were to build formative, or formative, which would be like pre-assessments to know how kids may do in the next unit, we could build a formative assessment, administer it, then we could do summative assessments at the end of the unit to see where the kids' strengths were, what they learned, what they didn't learn, and have more of an analysis on the unit to be able to look at and dig deeper, more real time than waiting till in the summer when we get a spreadsheet from the state. So we did spend a lot of time looking at products and products that fit into this marketplace, and these seem to be the top products in the market. eDoctrina is so new, I'm not really sure it's adopted by anyone, so that's why we were sort of tentative. And what we saw was it is a Harris Company product. That's another sort of property in their lineup that they're now moving into integrate with this product. But none of the integrations are in place yet, so it would all be like a completely separate platform, and we might be able to get some integrations. We would never be able to get integrations from this product to flow into Schoology or Skyward, which is our ultimate grade platform. If it was done, once it's done using Performance Matters in Schoology, assessments that would end up being graded assessments will actually then flow right into Skyward. So there's a full integration of all three products that makes it really easy for our teachers. And this is something that we don't want it to be. We do want to get the data, but we don't want to add another burden on the students who have to take. We don't want to give Scantrons to third graders, I don't think, any more than we already do with the PSSAs. But I think this is probably the better product. And we have spent a lot of time. The same teaching and learning team has spent a lot of time looking at products and having these conversations. And it is a product that I feel we need to add to our landscape of software.
Thank you both for the explanation. That makes a lot more sense now.
So since we're dropping EdInsight, we're really only looking at what? We're not looking at 44,000.
No. We would go from, again, if we would have EdInsight and bring on board eDoctrina, we would be was it 36,000 annually?
Yeah. But we're.
And if we were to stick with the Schoology product and the Performance Matters, after the first year, there's an $18,000 implementation cost, which is configuration setup, all of those implementation trainings. Then it's a $25,000 annual cost, which is just a little bit more than we're currently paying. Correct, and we get a lot more bang for that buck, I think.
What is the annual recurring fees based on? Is that user licenses? Like, where are
Based
they?
on number of students.
Number of students?
Yes.
Okay. So, do we know what that cost is per student?
I don't. I could get that document, that information. I just wanted to share the summary costs with you.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm just without more detail. I'm kind of struggling to really dig into this anymore. So I don't know if it when would we need to have approval for this or make a decision on it?
Well, ultimately, if we were to take the step of signing an agreement with PowerSchool, we would need to have your approval for that. We don't want to have a contract go into play without having your approval. So hopefully tomorrow they would say to us, here's the agreement. Again, maybe they'll defer until July 1st again. They'll give us the next 5 months.
Right.
And we would be able to move ahead, and then I would have something to share with you. I want to tell them tomorrow basically that I am bound by this board agreement, that I can't just hey, you're going to give me 4 months for free. I need to go.
Yeah, I guess where kind of my question's leading is this something that we could bring to the next committee of the whole in February with more documentation behind the proposal, or is that going to be
a problem? Possible, and it's possible that we won't see a deal tomorrow. It's possible that we will be just talking about this for a July 1 implementation, but hopefully they would want us to be onboarding before July 1.
Yeah.
Because a lot of our specialists, our counselors are using this data daily, and we don't want to cut this data off the on-hand school data off, just so they would, and then they have to learn a whole new product. We want them to be able to use it this year, and then we want to train people over the summer with the new product. So there is a lot of configuration and setup, and there's a lot of importing, getting things from assessments. So it is speculative at this point, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention. And if we were to say you do agree to a contract, we would bring it to you for a voting meeting at some point. It may not happen. Maybe it will happen in the committee of the whole meeting. Maybe it'll happen, like I said, maybe tomorrow.
Okay. But nothing from this discussion, we don't think anything's going to go to the January voting meeting for this.
Unless they give us a...
I guess that's where my contention is. I'd rather have the full proposal,
yes,
back to a committee of the whole meeting before it goes to a voting meeting.
Right.
Okay.
And I can tell them that tomorrow as well. So if they don't have something for us, we would have to come back, and we would be back. I would be back here next month sharing the same information with you, and then we would move forward with that.
Okay.
Do you negotiate that contract? So can you go back to them after they give you a deal and say, this is what I want, cost per student?
We have. We've gotten it down quite a bit. So I can certainly have that conversation tomorrow. We do have a couple other vendor quotes, but I do spend time talking to vendors about what's the absolute best price they can provide for us. 'Cause we might be one of only a handful of districts in the county that are using this combination of products, and to have that leverage for them, for us to be one of the products using both suites, it will be a good sales pitch for them, I think, if they can get on other districts. But
sounds
we'll
like
see.
you have a good sales pitch to bring that cost per student down. We believe in you.
I try. I will try harder.
Yeah, and the implementation phase would also be obviously something of concern there if there's anything we could potentially de-scope from those costs, but we trust you, Joe.
It is excessive. I do think, $18,000 does seem to be an excessive implementation fee, and I think from the start that was part of the last June when they came to us, and again, it was June, they came to us and said, here's this deal, we'll waive the implementation fee for a month, and then you can get on board and all this other stuff. It just seemed like we couldn't have jumped from on-hand schools to this product because of the implementation fee. The costs were so very similar at that time, but we couldn't have made the transition. We also ended our 3-year agreement with on-hand schools, and on-hand schools actually has a higher, because we're in a year-to-year agreement with them, we are actually not, we are in a deal mode right now. So we're not the traditional price because we didn't budget for more than the 3-year amount. So I went to them, they gave us a quote. It was actually from another district. It was from another E district in Pennsylvania, a smaller district. So I was like budgeting that amount. And then, so anyway, so it's possible that on-hand schools would actually be more expensive this year for the renewal, but we will certainly bring the best price forward.
Joe, what exactly do they do for $18,000? How do you implement something like this?
It's a lot of time. Importing data, getting data massaged, doing the scripts, pulling the data from the different resources, configuring the servers. I don't know what the number of man hours would be. There is training involved in that as well. And training, I think the training was something like $6,000 of it. So most of these vendors have a set cost for a day of training. And again, once I have something from them, I'll bring a full detailed item analysis forward with that.
Well, and if this came up before, I apologize. Would you be able to call other clients of theirs, or just call around
absolutely.
to some of the schools? What did you guys pay for the implementation?
Well, Joe Calamita has been in conversation with Central York School District, which is in the same exact model as we are with configuration. So he's been talking to them, and we always have those conversations to make sure that they'll always ask us how much we are quoted for it, so that they can, go to their sales rep and say, I can't believe you charged us for this. So, thanks.
Is this something that we considered with the teachers having to learn this whole new thing? I mean, is it going to take up one of our whole days, pretty much?
So that's always a consideration. And when we brought on-hand schools, that was brought on right before the pandemic started. So the teachers haven't had a whole lot of time with this product when you think about it. So we were really starting to get back into it this year. But as Joe said, moving forward with another product would actually be easier and better and more useful to teachers moving forward. The struggle is technology changes, and we could bring this product to you today and enter into a 3-year deal, and this company that Joe's working with that brings this product to you now could be bought out and could be no more. Like they could stop it, and then we're going to be shopping around for another product like we were a number of years ago when we used Performance Tracker, because they didn't support that anymore, which is what forced us to find something else. So that's always the issue when you're using technology. On the other hand, the other way to do it is to use paper pencil and keep everything on a spreadsheet, and that's not effective or easy to do either. So use efficient, and so this is really the more efficient way to do it, knowing that products will change because they continue to be different companies to continue to upgrade and have different features, or districts have different needs.
So I understand what you're saying about how this works much better with Schoology, how the platforms all align, type of thing. And to your point, so you're telling me that the teachers haven't had very much time with EdInsight, but it's been around for 10 or 15 years, correct?
3.
Yeah, we've only had it for 3 years.
But I not here. I just mean like the platform. I'm sorry, like the company has been around for quite a while, correct? EdInsight?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm not a teacher, so I apologize. I've only learned about EdInsight last year. So how long has PowerSchool Group been around?
Well, actually, EdInsight was purchased by, they're part of Harris. So now they were just purchased. So now they're a part of this other property also. So
Okay.
that's where we said a lot of these
Gotcha.
companies sort of. So Performance Matters is a product that was brought into the PowerSchool fold. And so then they've incorporated it into Schoology as their learning management system. So
Gotcha.
like we said, the real benefit is that the teachers know the platform of Schoology. They can go in, they can create assessments.
Right.
They'll have banks of questions available that are tied and already tied to standards that they can create the assessments. And it's really just adding a layer. It's simplifying that process of building common assessments for
Sure,
districts.
making it more streamlined for them.
Yeah.
I completely understand that. And to the other point, though, they are teachers because we just brought on EdInsight. They haven't even been, they haven't had like a full, like, here's how you should use this platform.
So
They did, right?
they did. Our teachers did, and it was right before COVID hit. We had someone from EdInsight come in. It might have been that October or November, and we were just kind of starting with it. And then COVID hit in March,
and everything kind of just went.
And then
Gotcha.
We weren't really collecting data for a time because of what was happening with COVID, and now we have just started to get back to it. So the teachers actually did have a refresher. Some of the teachers had a refresher this year to try to get back into this idea of data. But in the meantime, the teaching and learning team has been looking at and evaluating different products, knowing that we needed to find something that had these other features because that's where we needed to go next. So the issue was, do we go with something that's compatible with Schoology, which is what teachers have been using longer and has really taken hold in the district and is definitely an area of comfort? Do we find a product that aligns with that, with Schoology, or do we keep what we have and ultimately not really be able to use Schoology in the same way? And the decision was that Schoology is the better product right now, and we needed to find something that was compatible with Schoology, and that would be the easier transition for teachers at this point.
Understood. Thank you.
Our teachers. So to go back in time a little bit, I do have some sort of. When Dr. Martin was here, when we began the rollout of Performance Plus, we spent a lot of time doing data some of our early dismissals were common time for teachers to get together and look at data. And we had a lot of time training the teachers at how to look at data, how to get data out of it, how to figure out where there are strengths and weaknesses. So our teachers are not, it's the idea of data analysis is not foreign to our teaching staff at all. It's just sometimes for a teacher, I think Mr. Campbell could tell you that it's really nice at his former district, his teachers could click on a link and it would take them directly into their assessment data. And it was just so integrated that it was so much easier for the teachers to get a snapshot of that student instead of having to log out of one system and log into another system and then find the system and think, okay, how do I run this report? Really, it's just that ability to have it, at your fingertips that really is helpful. Sometimes when we're having those teacher conferences, it's really good. Like when I would go to my daughter's conferences, they would have all of that data right available in their data warehouse. And it was really nice because we could sit down and if there were any questions, they could just go right into the system and they could show the assessments and the data. It is really nice to have it all in one spot and not rely so much on anecdotal evidence, but actually have the evidence that we can, rely on and we can show and share and dig into.
I completely appreciate data. Trust me. And I'm the same way. My husband gave me an iPhone. It took me like 2 years to figure it out. Now if somebody hands me an Android, I'd probably be completely confused for like a month. So I appreciate you looking for that.
I think the overarching point, back to the beginning of the conversation with Mr. Morgan's comment about why this particular product, I think Mr. Way is really trying to point out that idea of efficiency for teachers. And teaching has always been part art and part science. And what we're really working on right now is the science part. So if we are serious about wanting our teachers to use data to drive instruction, and we are serious about that, then we want to help them to be the most efficient scientists that they can be with that process. And often the case is when you have integrated products that speak to each other and make their jobs easier in that way, it gives them more time to devote to actually analyzing the data than searching through the clutter to pull all of that data together.
Does the software offer any kind of metrics or reporting to let you know how often it's being utilized?
Yes.
Actually give us some insight on,
yes,
are we getting our money's worth?
Sure. I mean, currently, like I said, we're using the product at Insight very heavily.
Yeah.
Certain users are using it very heavily. Our teachers, again, because once they look at the PSSA data, it's sort of irrelevant. They spend the time looking at that data set and they plan their year, and that's really all they have to look at. Our principals are looking at attendance data, discipline data. Some of them are, because you can look at all that stuff in Skyward, you can find it, but there are some very simple reports that can get you student success. There's a student at-risk report, which creates a level of students' grades, students' performance, students' attendance, and gives you sort of an early warning dashboard of which kids might need to be brought into the counselor and so forth. So some of those tools are being used in pockets more than others. And again, with the pandemic and with Dr. Miner coming on board the June or the July before that, she was not a fan of on-hand schools and wanted to move to another product right away. And we were in a 3-year agreement, and so it's sort of the data we have there is sort of there because we kept it going and we kept adding to it. It wasn't like we were getting PD time in front of staff to really sit down and build that capacity for them to use it more regularly. But when we had Performance Plus, teachers were using it very regularly.
So the back again to the implementation fee and the training would be part of that adoption plan for the teachers to.
Well, the training would most likely be training the key stakeholders for the district.
Okay.
Most likely those meetings are 15 to 20 people, specialists, IT folks, administrators.
Okay.
We would get that training, and then we would then roll that out. The annual check would develop a plan of how that would look in the teachers' training plan for the year. We would roll out sessions. And
so the onus would be on your department then to make sure that
it always is.
The education.
Most of training is limited in number, and sometimes you don't want corporate folks coming in and trying to train your teachers because they don't. Some of them aren't even educators; they're just program IT people, and IT people, you know them.
Absolutely.
But IT people will come in and they'll sort of inundate them with all the minutia, and it'll be frustrating. And someone like Dan is very successful at finding snippets, putting it together, sharing it with teachers, and making it easy for them to digest. And again, if you see the calendar as part of a growth in PD and getting some good assessments, getting our teachers strong and having the ability to build quality curriculum, this is a tool that they're going to need to really be able to examine that and move forward. So it's good timing that the calendar was tonight as well, because it just sort of sets forward that we do want to use those. If someone were to say those half days are a waste of time, I would say they're absolutely not. They're essential.
Anything else, Dr. Badler?
No, that's everything for me.
Good. Thank you very much. Before we leave education, I neglected to welcome the team from Rifton and also our other administrators from around the system. So welcome and Happy New Year to you too. I'm keeping score here for the next meeting. So Dr. Badler, and I believe, Jason, you had a comment that we won't be taking this up at the January voting meeting. Do I have that correct?
Well, I mean, that was my suggestion. Obviously, that's the decision, the consensus of the board. But I would prefer not to vote on this until we've had time to look at an agreement that's written up at a Cal meeting.
Well, before I carve that in stone, what do the rest of you think?
I guess I would like just to know what the hope was. I believe the hope was to try to give us as much information as possible so that then we could get the contract and it would be okay, here's the rest of that piece, the actual, we can move this forward. But,
are we going to get that in the next 2 weeks?
I don't know.
And we don't know.
But I think that it doesn't, if we don't get it, it doesn't need to go on the voting agenda because there's nothing to vote. My thought would be that if we do get it, we'll have that information Friday, and we'll have until Tuesday to process it and look at it. And if we have further questions or aren't ready to make a decision, we can certainly table it to the committee of the whole meeting the next time. I mean, I don't know where the disadvantages of having another opportunity to open the discussion.
Yeah, I guess my concern also, there's been nothing presented to the public either, not just us. So, I mean, yeah, we could see the agreement, but there's been nothing here on the agenda other than a few notes that we have there.
Right, that's a good point. Well, then we'll wait. We'll put it on the February COW. All right, good. Thank you, folks. All right. Next, we have the Finance, Facilities, and Audit Committee. Mr. Mell.
Thank you, Mr. Fiddler. First up, we have the tax collectors, Susan Eggert from St. Lawrence Borough. Just want to make a correction. It says township there. And Christy Pearsall from Exeter Township. They requested to discuss installment payments and per capita reimbursements. If you both want to come up, I appreciate your patience. Thank you.
We both have had requests from taxpayers to see if you would consider going to 4 installments instead of 3. You can spread it out a little bit more. You had 306 installment people. I had 33, but I only have 722 properties, so the percentages are a little bit different. But I think some of the people might pay if they could spread it out a little bit more. I don't know if that's something we would consider doing.
Just to put a face with who's typically using it, at least from my perspective, it seems to be people who are on fixed income. So spreading it from 3 to 4, if it's a $3,500 bill, that could be the difference between them having $300 left in their Social Security for that month versus not having that. So just play in there a little bit.
Sure.
We need lots of time to consider because the tax bills aren't going out till July, but
sure.
We just wanted to put it out there to see if it's something that you could discuss in the future and take into consideration.
Yeah, I guess we'd also have to
It's
have
only like
shared
340
research
people, properties, but it's through helping out 340 taxpayers.
Yeah,
it's as much a legal question as a budgeting timing question. So, right.
I guess my question is, has this ever come up in the past with Mr. Diamond? Has he brought this up before? I thought I would recall.
No, he didn't want that that this is
Okay.
because it would have been a little bit more work to do
Okay.
one more installment. So
Okay.
Chrissy doesn't mind doing it. I don't mind doing it if it's going to help out. Even if it only helps out a handful of people, it's helping out some of the taxpayers.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's, I mean, in my opinion, I think it's worth entertaining. Definitely if there's an easier installment plan that allows for smaller payments, that's easier for folks. I think that makes sense. But yeah, I kind of like what Mr. Fike said. I think we'd have to defer to our council to investigate that a little bit more.
Okay. And my other request is on people that overpay their per capita. Could you maybe pass a resolution or something that says anything under $1.20 does not get reimbursed back to the taxpayer? It's 60 cents for the postage, the envelope, the letter to print it on, the check. Is it not? It's not really worth it to me because I never hand in a bill to you to ask for reimbursement of those things. That's all coming out of my pocket, and it's for $1.20. They never cashed the check. Then I got to hand it over to the county, to the Escheat thing, and it just seems it's not. I'll give you the money at the end of the year. I don't need to keep it in my account, but it just seems kind of. It's a lot of work to reimburse somebody for $1.20 when it costs more to mail it out.
Yeah, I'll make note of this. I did take this to the board in August, and at that time there wasn't a consensus to move it to the voting meeting. So that's up to you. To me, it really doesn't matter. I know a lot of places they give a minimum for returning checks or make the people request the amount if it's under a certain amount. I think Sharon spoke to this last time too.
As I recall, I did look into it. I mean, taxpayers are entitled to refunds of if they've overpaid. That's sort of the basic standard, but you can put in guidelines for how to get that repayment. They have to go to the office. They have to, make a written request. You don't have to mail it out to them or tell them that they've overpaid. If they come in and want their overpayment back, they can come to the office and ask for it. Those sorts of procedural requirements are acceptable.
At the Berks County Tax Collector Association meetings, they suggested that we ask for a resolution that says to not reimburse under $1.20. Because that's the most it ever is, $1.20.
Doesn't Berks EIT do about the same thing? You don't get a refund if it's less than X amount, and you don't have to pay any more if you owe less than X amount. So it evens out in the end.
Yeah, I think the dollar, over and under $1, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
$1.20 is what we get because they'll pay the $11 penalty in the $9.80 discount, so it comes to $1.20. I've had about 6 of them, but it's just that it's a lot of work to reimburse it, and it's not financially feasible to. It costs more to mail it out now, but I leave it up to you.
And am I correct from our discussion last time? A lot of times they won't cash a check, so
and they don't cash the check.
Then you end up having to turn it over to the state.
And then our accountants have a little bit of a nightmare when they're auditing the records, and why do you still have this money?
I don't understand why. I mean, I think that Sharon has a good suggestion. Why don't we just say that they either have to pick it up or they can mail you a self-addressed envelope and spend $3 to get a $1.20 check back?
But at least cash it.
That is the tax collector's options, that they can put those requirements in place. I wouldn't want to see us passing a resolution that is inherently not within the parameters of the law, which is if you overpay, you're entitled to your money back.
Well, then how, Sharon, how does the Berks EIT get around that?
People do all kinds of things.
Okay.
Well, due to my acumen in investing, I still have a check in my magazine rack for 2 cents that one of my investments sent me 2 years ago. So not everybody cashes all the checks.
So just hearing feedback from the board, it sounds like there's no action on that item that we want to take.
So Sharon, that wouldn't be a rule for us to make, but a rule for them to make.
Right, that would be their rules to impose on anybody who's expecting a refund. Yes, if you want me to look further into the absolute legality of the board passing a resolution of that nature, I certainly will.
And how would we, if we put that into place, how do we let the taxpayers know that that's our new policy?
How many people?
I'm asking because I don't know.
How
We'd
many
have to
people are we
actually
talking about?
We're only talking about like 5 or 6 people every year, and hers is way more. I only have,
But like, what are we talking about a total approximately of these $1.20 checks?
I have at least $15 worth that's just sitting in the account uncashed over the last 3
But
years.
I guess my question is, if it takes Sharon an hour to research that,
It's not worth
it's going to cost the district more than the checks.
Could you ask the solicitors of the borough and the township?
We did,
to
and
look-
our solicitor said that really wouldn't be the borough's decision. That would be the school district's decision.
When you
Typical.
when you mail out your bill, can it be written there that
That's what they're supposed to pay.
no that
Oh.
that if a refund is due?
I mean, I guess we could put that in the comments at the top.
I mean, is that a
if
solution for you
overpay,
guys?
This will not be. You need to come to the office to get refunded. They won't even know they overpaid it because they're overpaying it. So,
That's what Burke CIT does.
but we can put that in the comments that says nothing more than $1.20 is going to be refunded. If you want that, you need to come to the office to get it. Nothing less.
Yeah,
That's
I've
the
never
most it's ever going to be.
I've never had any, but not never, but in the 1 year of doing it, no one has ever come to ask for a refund, but I don't think they think that they're paying the correct amount. So,
I've already had someone try to pay me the $9.80, then the 10, and then the 11. Because they don't understand the process. But okay, we can put that in the comments if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's our call. Yeah, so we.
I think they're $1. I think it's anything under $1 is there. Sure, I get it. Okay.
But it does, so beyond the per capita refund issue, it does sound low that we do want to have Sharon investigate the additional installment payment. Hearing no objections to that. Okay. Thank you
All right.
very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to item B, and actually item C is related to this, but this is a settlement offer for the 2023 tax year for Reading Hospital. We just full disclosure, the attachments of the dockets were just added today to these agenda items, so these were not originally on there, but they are out there for visibility now. Any discussion? Okay. And item C, any discussion on that one? Okay, that is it for my committee report, Mr. Fiddler.
Thank you, Mr. Mill. We move now to the Personnel Committee. Mrs. Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Fiddler. 2 items on the agenda tonight. Number 1, we have change of status for support staff. And our second item to be moved to the voting meeting on January 17th is course requests. Any discussion? Okay, that is it for my committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Schaefer. Dr. Hemberger, Policy.
Thanks, Mr. Fiddler. On the agenda this evening for our discussion are 2 policies that are being recommended for revision. First reading, which means that we would be passing them in February, if there were no significant changes to these. So, maybe Mrs. Harris can kind of walk us through some of the recommended changes for sick leave and the other one is the family and medical leave.
I certainly can, Dr. Hemberger. Thank you. So we updated 334 and 335 largely to better align them with the recent collective bargaining agreements that were negotiated. So making sure that our language in our policy matches the language in those collective bargaining unit agreements. Additionally, there's just some minor changes to language that are updated suggestions from PSBA. So in policy 334, the sick leave policy, there's some updated language around the definition of what a medical practitioner is. There's some additional examples other than just a licensed physician, and that's recommended PSBA language. Additionally, there's a clarification around how requests are made for sick leave with or without pay, and that's that those are written requests, which has largely already been the practice in the district, just not codified in policy. And then in addition to this, again, something that's been a practice in the district but not necessarily reflected in the policy is the opportunity for the use of sick leave banks, which is something that exists here in the district for our bargaining unit members. And I think that's it for 334. And then 335, again, some minor changes to language, adding in the superintendent or designee shall have the opportunity to disseminate administrative regulations related to FMLA. And then additionally in that policy, there's updated language in there to represent what's currently in the collective bargaining unit agreement regarding the use of paid leave concurrent with the FMLA leave, which is a change in the current contract. So Christy, I don't know if you had anything else to add to that.
No, as Dawn shared, before it was consecutively. So what had previously been the practice is people would use their sick leave and then add up to 12 weeks of FMLA leave. But many districts have moved to make it concurrent, that, you know, if you have sick leave, that it also goes along with your FMLA leave, that it's being used at the same time. So, and that, like I said, is something that a number of districts have moved to, not just Exeter.
Question about 334. Paragraph 3, and I understand some of this was original language also. You know, I don't know that I'm in favor of allowing, having the board reserve the right for documentation for a single day. It seems to me that there should be something more defined or measurable around that. We want people to stay home when they're sick. We encourage people to stay home when they're sick, and we have a policy here that says that we reserve the right to say you have to show proof that you were sick. And I don't know about everybody else, but there are plenty of times that I have a really bad cold that I should probably stay home and I don't seek medical attention on that day because it works its course. And the way that this is written, the board at any time has the right to say, we want you to show documented proof that you were sick. I understand if it's day 2 or day 3. I just want to better understand why we're kind of putting this window in. Well, even if you're out for one day, we may ask you for proof.
It's because it was abused.
But it wouldn't be abused by everyone. But in my opinion, the suggestion is
one person.
So in my opinion, the suggestion is that any employee understands the fact that they could be asked at any time. And I personally don't think that that is a good policy, especially if we're trying to have a good relationship between the board and the administration and the employees.
We have a monetary and contractual relationship with our teachers and all of our staff. If they take off a day it was being abused, I take off a day this every month, I take off 2 days every month, and I was sick or I had to go to the dentist. Now, you're not just talking somebody earning $50 a day, you're talking someone earning significant money. And that's, we're protecting the taxpayers' money.
I think
I don't need to get along with them that much.
It would seem to me that the administration would have an opportunity if something was being abused to investigate that with the union and figure out what next steps would be.
I'm
I
just
feel as though
telling
that this
you, I
should be
remember when
different.
this was installed, and yes, it would seem to you that one, we wouldn't have employees abusing it, and two, that we could go through the union, but that didn't work, so we put this in, and it's a sword of Damocles over the head.
So what happens exactly, just so I'm clear, Mr. Quinter, if a employee is asked to show proof, they were actually sick and they did not seek medical attention and have no proof, what is the discipline action?
I don't do discipline. I do money.
So that's always a very unpleasant piece of being an administrator, but it's also a role that administration has to comply with as well, because even as the superintendent, if I were out sick, the board could ask me, if I had a doctor's note. I don't want to speak for Sharon, but having worked with several attorneys now, the advice that I've gotten as an HR director and even as a principal is that when you put it in policy, it gives it more teeth. And unfortunately, not just in Exeter, in other districts as well, in other workplaces as well, there are people that develop a pattern of being out on Mondays and Fridays, and it is very detrimental to students, and it does impact the staff that they work with. So having it in policy hopefully deters people from doing that because that language is there, but it also does give the administration leverage to require that they produce a doctor's note. Now, I would say that if we were in that situation with the teacher, we wouldn't just be springing this on them. There would have already been a conversation with them, with their union rep, and not just teachers, with support staff or food services who are under a different union, that we've noticed a pattern of absences, or we notice that you're always out on a professional development day. And if this continues, please be advised that we could be asking for documentation. So it's not something that anyone likes to do. However, the reality is that when we have a number of teachers out, it does impact the other teachers when we have to cancel specials, and then ultimately it does have a negative impact on the students that we serve. So it's not meant to frighten, intimidate, threaten anyone. It's just a matter of fact and policy that it's there, and if we need to exercise it because we have identified abuse of the sick days, that we have it in policy to be able to do so.
So according to this policy, then, if you do feel as though that needs to happen, you need to seek board approval in order for that to happen. Is that correct?
What paragraph are you looking at?
Paragraph 3, the board reserves the right, not the administration reserves the right, or the board directs the superintendent or designee. It says the board reserves the right. So if that situation were to happen, you'd have to come to the board for a vote on approval to ask for that, correct? If we were going to keep the language in, I think that it should be directed towards the administration, not towards the board.
If the board is the one that lays down the law, then the administration cannot be accused of being a bunch of jerks. We can be the jerks, and Christy explained it, and it's exactly the situation that came up when this was put in there, and that we had one or two individuals who were missing always on a Friday or a Monday, and repeated it over and over again. It's just a little hammer in there that doesn't hurt anybody unless you're using it. Trust but verify.
So what is the process currently when someone calls out sick?
So the system we have in place right now is for our teachers. They use ASAP, which we've talked about in the past. We're going to be moving the rest of, it's already in process, moving the rest of our staff to using ASAP as well. Some of them are still using paper copies, some of them are using Skyward, but everyone will be using ASAP. That was the purpose of it. And typically it's the building principal that identifies the pattern first. And if they have a concern, then the building principal will speak to the HR director And oftentimes, then what will happen is they will bring that person with their union rep and let them know that they've seen that they've had either excessive absences or that they're always absent on a Monday or a Friday, or the day right before a holiday, and that if this practice continues and they're absent within this pattern, that they're going to start to be asked for doctor's notes. But it's not something that we kind of like spring on people. There's generally a conversation that happens ahead of time.
So there's no requirement such as we require our students after 3 days of absence from school to produce a doctor's note. There's nothing in place for employees.
If our teachers are absent for a period of time, they're very, very good at communicating with the administrators about what's happening, and letting them know that why they're out. And COVID was a perfect example of that. We had people that were out. First, it was mandatory 10 days, and it was like we kind of had to keep adjusting it and communicating with the teachers. Most teachers and staff over communicate with their principal and text them and let them know immediately because they're freaking out that they have to be out. It is way harder for a teacher to be out of school than it is just to come in and be sick, to be totally honest with you. But now with COVID, people are being really cautious and respectful of their colleagues and of other students to make sure that if they're sick and they take a test and they're not coming in, they're not spreading germs. So they're trying to be really thoughtful of that. But it's also very upsetting to teachers when they know that a colleague of theirs is abusing sick time and that kids are being penalized for it because oftentimes they're not getting the instruction that they need, or they have to cover the class and they're not getting to what they need. Kids are losing specials. So it is a very sensitive topic. And for aides, it's very difficult because we really only have special ed aides now, and many of them are specifically assigned to students. And so when those aides are out, and if that's an abuse, then we have difficulty providing the coverage that they need. And food services, bus drivers, it's very detrimental when we see that.
And just a practical point, I understand the question that you're asking, but while everyone was talking, I was just doing a little checking here based on the citations for that paragraph. And that's not our addition, that's part of code. So it's actually written that way because of that, even though in the rest of the policy it defers to the superintendent or the superintendent's designee. I just checked a couple of other schools to make sure that what I was checking was correct, and they also have the policy written that way because that's how it's written in code. So I don't know that it necessarily means that they have to bring to you every case where they want to require a doctor's note. I think it's more saying that general sense that this board has the authority to give her that authority to do that. I agree with you. It's not written as clearly as it should be. EA for us for kind of picking at that. But that is part of code, and that's why it's written that way.
I appreciate the explanation.
Yeah, I just need a little
No, that's fine.
To do the research.
It was more me just making sure I better understood why, because I'm not used to seeing that. I know that's not something we require of our students, so
yeah,
I appreciate the explanation.
No, it was a good question, and I agree with you. It is not as clear, I think, as it could be there.
I was going to suggest that you tweak the language a little bit, but then it really starts to become more of an AR issue rather than the policy issue. So just leave it.
Well, that was going to be my question, whether or not this policy deserves or has an AR that accompanies it, because it would be helpful for administrators to know, okay, how do we actually, under what conditions do we implement a process where we hold teachers accountable or staff accountable for what appears to be willful violation of our sick leave policy.
You know how I feel about process, Dr. Hamburger. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
But that hyperlink number 1, I think you pointed out correctly, takes you directly to the school code, and you can see that language verbatim identified in school code. So with the exception of the bold language, which is sort of embellishments to kind of clarify what they mean by the medical professional. And then they've added quarantine too. to that aspect.
Yeah, I missed that part. Thank you. The word quarantine is in there, not because we ever hope to exercise anything like that again, but because we're just acknowledging that we may at some point receive a doctor's note related to quarantine. That's all.
Any other questions about the policy? Comments? Either policy? So if not, they'll be recommended. Well, we'll have to have that. Mr. Phillips can go through that, but we hope to see that on the board agenda for approval.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Hemberger, and Mrs. Harris, too. I don't have anything on the public comment list, but is there anyone in the audience who would care to address the board? All right. Now we'll see how well I've been keeping score to item number 8, forwarding of items to the voting agenda. First one is the meeting minutes. And then Education Committee item A, the calendar. And please, colleagues, just jump in if I either miss one or put one in that shouldn't be there. As well as item B, conference requests. And then item D as in David, field trips beyond the 60-mile radius. I don't think C requires board action. Am I correct, Dr. Battler? Yeah, right. Okay. Okay. And item D, D as in David, that does require board action, so we'll move that ahead. And item E, I think it was the sense of the board, if I read it correctly, that we'll move that to not move it to the January voting meeting, but move it to the February Committee of the Whole meeting. All right. Finance, Facilities, and Audit. The first two items were just for board discussion, and I think, Sharon, you're going to research the installment question. And then we'll move ahead to the voting meeting items B and C. For Personnel Committee, Mr. Schaefer, I don't think the first one needs board action. Is that correct? They both do. Okay, it's not written as a motion, but we will add it. So the support staff and item B, course requests. And finally, agenda item 6A, the two policies, we will be moving those ahead to the voting meeting. Anything that I missed or anything that anyone would like to add? All right.
Mr. Fiddler, not around voting, but just a quick comment, if I'm allowed.
Sure. Well, that was the next item. Are there any board members who would like to be heard at this time?
Yes, sir. I'd like to be heard. Thank you. Dr. Haller, just wondering if you could possibly give us an update. I know that Mr. Seidel has been here for a couple months now, and I know that we can't always share all the details of what he's doing, but maybe you could just share how things are working out and a little bit about how you feel things are going with him as our security coordinator.
I think that Eric has been a great addition to our schools, to our district. He's done a building assessment of all of our buildings at this point, just to look at what safety upgrades are needed. That's as much as I can share specifically about that. But we are looking now towards making some modifications and upgrades per his recommendation based on board approval. Those things are discussed during executive session, so people won't necessarily hear about them. And our next focus is having him start to provide training to our teachers. And we were actually meeting today to talk about that for our March 20th Professional Development Day, that Eric will be doing a professional development training, a professional development session with our teachers on safety.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. Thank you. I just wanted to point out, as you were talking about the physical safety stuff and what a great addition Eric has been to the staff, there's a whole other part of school safety you've heard us talk about, which is behavioral health and mental health aspects of school safety, which are equally important. Some would argue more important than the physical safety aspects. And there's someone here who is just essential to that process, which is Alicia Leonard, who is our student services coordinator. And she's kind of working on the opposite side of Eric. So Eric is working on all of that physical safety stuff and building safety and building security sort of end of things. And Alicia really is our behavioral health and mental health arm. And so we definitely have a leg up on that because she's been here a little bit longer. But just wanted to point that out as well, that that's a really huge part of our school safety process.
Anybody else from the board who wishes to be heard? Nothing else? Right after this.
Your mic went out, Mr. Fiddler.
I'm sorry. Two choices to make, and I made the wrong one. Right after this meeting, the board will meet in executive session. So we will say goodnight, and our next meeting will be Tuesday, January 17th. Hearing no objections, we will adjourn.